All right. I'd like to call the order April 22nd, 2025, Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District Board of Fire Commissioners meeting. Caroline, can you do roll?
Vice Chair Bulkley,
Here.
Commissioner Easterby.
Here.
Commissioner Correll. Here. And Commissioner Mendel.
Here.
And Chair Truax is absent.
So we're gonna jump ahead to new business. But the first item on the agenda, consideration of resolution 2025-01, a resolution of Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District recognizing the contributions of Division Chief Natalie Moore.
So if you could turn to page 12 of your packet here. So I'll start by pointing out that we're still harassing Chief Morrow to have a retirement party. So Caroline's kind of leading that process out.
Harassment.
But once we have more details on that, we'll let you know kind of where that is. I'd also note that I was thinking about it today. There's basically two individuals that have been on the department longer than myself, Captain Salzman and Chief Morrow. There's probably just the amount of knowledge that's in that group is invaluable, and what they've kind of done for service in this community. So it's going to be a huge loss to the district, but the community as a whole. And this resolution is just something for the board, but we do want to put something together and throw her a big hurrah when she finds the time. So, yeah. Traditionally for these, what we've done, board chair is actually read through the resolution to kind of recognize all the whereases that are relevant in this situation. Go from there. Unless there's something you want to do from like a public comment, now that you're not speaking on anything.
Sure you wouldn't like to sit through the budget first?
The fire department all these years, and I love being starting off as a volunteer and working my way through, and it's just time for me to move on and enjoy the rest of my life. With my husband.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you in 6 months.
Yeah.
Well, I personally like to thank you for the work you've done, and I've enjoyed working with you. So good luck.
Thank you.
Exactly.
As have I, Chief. You've been a real, it's great seeing you back, seeing your smiling face again. But we missed you.
You know,
And we'll miss you.
yeah, I mean, same here, right? We haven't worked together that long, but I've known you up from the ski era and working with you there, and I always kind of considered you as part of our team up there, with the work you did for us. So thank you, and we'll definitely miss you.
Congratulations on the chair.
Thanks.
Am I reading this?
You can, or you can direct me to read it since you're the
Chief,
boss.
it's yours.
All right. One time we were doing I think it was the resolution for the ballot measure, and one of the poor commissioners had to read the whole thing, and then I think somebody like, you don't actually have to read the whole thing. That was about 8 pages. So resolution number 2025-01, a resolution of the Board of Commissioners of the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District recognizing the contributions of Division Chief Natalie Morrow. Whereas Division Chief Natalie Morrow began her service as a firefighter with the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District on February 16, 1999, and has risen through the ranks, ultimately promoting to division chief, overseeing prevention and emergency medical services. And whereas Division Chief Morrow's extensive career with the United States Armed Forces, where she served as a major in the U.S. Army, has contributed greatly to her high standards of discipline, job knowledge, integrity, and communication for all district personnel. And whereas Division Chief Morrow serves in the specialized role as the district's hazardous materials specialist and is the designated staff trainer for hazmat education. And whereas Division Chief Morrow has always been mindful of the interests of the district and has consistently offered to support fellow officers and district staff in every way possible, including working holidays and events to allow others to spend time with their families. And whereas Division Chief has provided outstanding leadership through years overseeing the prevention division, now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Commissioners of the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District that Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District Board of Fire Commissioners honors and recognizes through this resolution the tremendous contributions of Division Chief Nally Morrow and enacts Resolution 2025-01 immediately upon adoption.
We have a motion.
Do we have a motion?
I'll move.
I will second.
It's been moved and second to approve resolution 2025-01.
Commissioner Bulkley, what is your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Easterby,
Yes.
Commissioner Correll? Yes. And Commissioner Mendel?
Yes.
This motion carries 4-0. Congratulations.
Let's see.
Yeah.
We thought you might need to play more stuff to decorate your wall. I'll be honest, I'm still having unpacked from the Miami deployment is an absolute disaster. I've been having to move all my stuff out of this office. There's stuff everywhere. Yep, thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. They just want to dance. Thank you.
So what is the party, Natalie?
I got her to-
Gilbert says, that Danny's coming into town. Gilbert, just told Danny he has to be on May 8th, so we're gonna do May 8th for Gilbert.
Oh, we really are?
Yes.
Did we ask anybody?
I'll keep it wet.
I haven't asked Ed yet.
What do you want to?
Okay,
We'll figure it out.
we will figure it out.
I just kind of go with it.
Gilbert doesn't want to cook.
He's one.
Good, I'm in town.
I don't know if we want to give her cooking either. That's.
All right. Back to the top of the agenda. What do we have? Meeting minutes. And Jeff, just want to verify we want to vote on both sets of minutes?
Correct.
Okay.
I'd move to approve the minutes.
Are we voting on one set at
We'll-
a time?
Yeah, we'll vote on approving March 25th, 2025 minutes,
Okay.
which is the
John?
last regular meeting, correct?
I will second the motion to approve March 2025 minutes.
Commissioner Bulkley, what's your vote? Commissioner Easterby?
Yes.
Commissioner Correll? Yes. And Commissioner Mendel?
Yes.
This motion carries 4-0.
And then do we have a motion to approve March 27th, 2025 special board meeting?
I motion for approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner
moved to
Bulkley,
second.
what is your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Easterby?
Yes.
Commissioner Correll? Yes. Commissioner Mendel?
Yes.
This motion carries 4-0.
All right. No special presentations. Any public comment?
None on the Zoom?
No? Anyone? Michael?
He's attending for association. He might come on later.
Okay, we don't have anything on the consent agenda, so we'll move to budget review.
So if you could turn to page 9 of your packets, we'll go through the budget real quick and I'll probably have a little bit of historic reference just to get Commissioner Burrell kind of up to speed. So a couple things I'll note, when the board originally adopted this budget, we were kind of at an inflection point at the district where we were recognizing that the service needs weren't keeping up with the revenues coming into the district. And the board felt that the reality is we had to provide those services. And we would work towards moving forward with Measure M, then we would make a decision kind of mid-year if we found that we did not pass Measure M by tightening up expenditures and getting ourselves to where we had to be with keeping a balanced budget. So originally we ran a budget deficit of about 500,000 was the expectation. Recognizing that what we do have is a general fund balance similar to what the town has. From January, I'll note that it was about 1.7 billion in there, so that 500,000 would have come out of the general fund balance to provide services this year. It was always our intent to try to close that gap over time to see how close we could get, and so I'll take you through that as we work down the list. So going through the income side of the budget, we received our first apportionment of our tax revenue, which generally is about 64% of our budget, the revenue side. The way we budget is we put all of that into the just first property tax line, because we don't have a great breakout from the county on the front end. So that percentage shows it as a lower amount, but it actually is the 68 that you see for the total property revenue tax that came in. So we brought in about 3 million on that first portionment. We're most likely gonna come in slightly over budget on that, just because the APA projections have been slightly delayed. We have budgeted for the last few years directly off APA projections. I will note that the town this year took a little bit of a more conservative stance and budgeted essentially flat from this year to next year. So if we're in a position to do the same, we probably should consider that. I'll also note that the county provides guidance on what APA projections are, because unfortunately we have to budget prior to receiving the final APAs, which come out in the fall. We have to have a budget meeting before that. And they tend to give you something in the spring that's based off previous years' APA projections, kind of where they project things to go. They weren't sure if they were gonna do that this year, so like I said, we may take a little bit more conservative approach. That said, that should come in fairly in line. Working through other revenues, we're still seeing our lease revenue coming in. The reality is that that's basically in the middle of litigation at this point, and depending on where the parties decide to go with that, I don't know if that's a secure source of funding, depending on how things work out, so something to consider for next year's budget. Moving through, everything is fairly kind of in line with where we'd expected. Again, the Mono County Fire Chiefs had a larger surplus in their budget. They decided to basically spread out equally amongst the Mono County Chiefs Associations at their standard yearly proportions. We actually receive a smaller amount because it's less impactful to our budget and groups like the binding, so it's a tiered system, but we essentially doubled it this year. And then assistance for hire. So assistance for hire, if you remember, is the category that we use for reimbursement for the district going out and providing equipment and personnel on larger wildfire incidents. So this is a new program that we started up. Generally, this gets budgeted at a very small amount and then that grows, but there's also a complementary expense that basically ties that together. So from a budget impact, you really should stay relatively neutral between the two of those, assuming that you have your personal costs appropriately captured. And the equipment costs don't go into here, they come into our capital expenditure budget. But the reality is we do significant wear and tear on our equipment, so this helps pay for a portion of that. Last year we had 4 large pieces of apparatus out at one time at certain points, and those last one we purchased was about $500,000. So
Yeah.
so pretty significant investment from the district side. So right now the assistance for hire is showing 490. Couple things to think about is from a cash flow perspective, we do fine because of our general fund balance, but it's actually a slightly higher number. This doesn't account for, we did get reimbursed for the line fire in January, and our CPA just hasn't put that in there. So it's sitting at 671,000, expected to be up to 897 if we get fully reimbursed for all of our incidents this year, within the year. Generally, because of the way that our CPA does our budgeting, it's accrual, so even if that money comes in next year, we're gonna see that brought back to this budget. So you should see that at about 900,000 on the operating budget. There's another 482,000 that goes back to our capital expenditures, which is our equipment, which will almost pay for one of our type 3 apparatus that the board purchased in December. We did have 122 come in from the CAL FIRE wildfire assistance grant this year. A couple things that we have to be careful about is that has been a large portion of the revenue that's been supporting our wildland program. We're actually going to have probably a larger amount come out of it this year because we had some spending that we didn't do for some CEQA documentation that hopefully CAL FIRE is going to be able to let us move in some other categories such as personal costs and equipment. We also received $200,000, which may not come into our next budget, to help fund 4 more individuals on our wildland program from the town of Mammoth Lakes. So we're going to be at 12 personnel this year. But we have to be careful because one, that's going to be the last year of our grant funding this next year. It's also, there's nothing long-term secured for the town for those 4 personnel. So that'll depend on, town council priorities and their budget as well. So 26-27 is looking pretty well funded for the wildland program. But there could be a drop off in, 25-26, and 26-27, we could have a drop off. So we have to be careful with how we budget some of the Measure M funding, so we don't have a problem the following year, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Any questions on revenues general? So I'll move into personnel. So the district has 13 pay periods within a year. And what that means is we should be glide pathing at approximately 84% because we've gone through 11 of our 13 pay periods. And that's assuming that everything is kind of linear, which it isn't. We have more costs on some things in the summer. We also have to make some early payments on things such as our CalPERS payment is paid earlier in the year. So roughly it should be at about 84%. If you look through the categories, a couple areas that are essentially where we want them from a glide path perspective. I will say on the division chief category, we had budgeted on not knowing when Chief Morrow was going to come back. So, she ended up coming back kind of later in the fiscal year. So we had a stronger budget there. This also doesn't include certain payouts that we did paying out on vacation and retirement. So that number will go up a little bit there. It is later down in the budget, but it's in a different category. Essentially should be. The bulk of the overtime costs are just tied to sending individuals out of district. And for the most part, the intent on the personnel costs is that we are completely covered by those incidents, but we're not making money on that portion either. So that piece relatively balances out, other than there are some adjustments we're making with the employee contracts to make sure that we're staying kind of equal on those portions, which I'll mention later in the meeting. One area that is higher on the first page there is the employee retirement costs, regardless of the fact that we pay early. We're at 99%. We still have 2 more payrolls. A lot of these categories, that's just reflective of the fact that we've added, the equivalent of 8 personnel that are working from May through November or December. And that's almost equivalent of about 3 or 4 full-time personnel. So those are costs that are going to be probably sunken into the budget essentially for the foreseeable future. So working down further again for assistance for hire, the 690,000 is direct costs for employees that were on the incident, but it's not the full cost that we have. So for example, if firefighter Holty is on an incident, his wages actually go back into the wages firefighter full-time. And that's why it's important to recognize that the cost actually higher than that 690 that you see there. And volunteer incentives is just a small category. So we did have a couple of purchases of regular, which is some helmets for people that have put in 15 years. So those numbers are slightly higher. The other thing with volunteer incentives is they go up when you have a good response and training from your part-time staff. So basically there's an annual amount that's allotted to those employees if they hit 50% of trainings and 20% of calls. So being high in that category is actually a good thing. It means that people are showing up for
Exactly, yeah.
it's money well spent. So right now we're sitting at basically 101% of what that budget is. But I would notice if you took out assistance for hire, which again is kind of a money in, money out, we'd be sitting at 81%, so kind of right where we'd want to be if you weren't considering it. Okay. Any questions on personnel costs? Nope. Okay. So I'll keep moving through. Legal, we've got quite a few things we're working on between the cell tower. I've been working with some of our more specialized, kind of unique legal services on some other questions dealing with, for example, our starting to work on our MOU with our employees. So these costs are relatively in line with kind of what we see. Accounting is high because, as I mentioned, we've got a product that in the past we put under miscellaneous called consulting, which is a wages and benefit package that's also tied to some of our GASB reporting, which is accounting reporting that we're required to do. When we try to move away from the package on the wages employees, our GASB costs double. So I felt it was better to put it into accounting than miscellaneous consulting, because ultimately we're going to be having to pay those regardless. And the reality is, as I mentioned in the past, we have a we're not paying standard business costs for our accounting because our CPA does this essentially, doesn't purely volunteer, but he does this at a reduced cost. So, the district has to over time prepare for those costs increasing. Moving through the audit, one note, we did have a tentative agreement with our previous auditor to do this year's audit. He was planning on doing it this spring, and we're just still working with him. So do expect that to happen, assuming that he's available for that. And everything else is kind of fairly in line with the administrative expenses. Any questions on those? Okay, so moving into logistics. Couple things I'll note on here. For the most part, again, we want to be kind of at that 80–85% for where we are this year. So we're fairly in line. The one that I want to dig into a little deeper is facilities, buildings and ground. And you'll note that we were budgeted for about 65,000. Usually when we're budgeting these, we do kind of an average of the last 5 years and use that kind of as a benchmark. Although we'll note that these are categories that have been more susceptible to the inflation that we've seen over the last few years, that have been rising over the last couple of years. The other thing we're doing is we used to put 225,000 away towards our capital expenditures. And really that wasn't covering our true capital expenditures. And as we're kind of massaging the budget to have a true annual operating and a true capital expenditures, you want to be careful that you're not throwing capital expenditures into something you're not funding yet. So historically, a lot of things that truly are capital expenditures have gone into the annual operating budget, and we start to move some of those out. But also being careful that the capital expenditure budget reflects the need over those. You don't need a roof till you do. If you have a budget for that over the last 30 years, then you can start to get yourself in trouble. So I did task Chief Walker to really start working on kind of a lot of the preventative maintenance. The station is starting to show its age a little bit. So just as an example, the primal vent systems, which are the diesel exhaust systems that catch the diesel as the apparatus leaving, things like that. We did preventative maintenance on, and those start to add up. We had one project in particular that is a necessary project, and in hindsight, I probably would have brought it to the board and we would have probably capitalized it, which was ideally we're working towards individuals at Fire Station 2 having the same services and equipment that we have at Fire Station 1. And one of the things that we historically have not had is kind of an extractor and washer dryer system for our protective equipment at Station 2. So if you're a Station 2 firefighter and you had a structure fire, they would have to bring their equipment over to Station 1, wash it here, and then you got to service it for a longer period of time. So especially because best practices are moving towards kind of that safety of keeping your equipment clean, obviously from all the carcinogens. We decided that was a good purchase. Originally it looked like it was going to be a $7,000 extractor, so not a huge deal. We ended up purchasing a couple other pieces to it, which would have brought it to right about $10,000, but the work on the station ended up adding up, where just the plumbing on that, to run the lines and the gas line over for that extractor machine and its associated equipment came out to $30,000. So I think there's a couple different takeaways on there. Yes, this in the future will probably go towards capital expenditures. So we're hesitant to move things, until we have that budget set up so that we're not, buying projects that we frankly can't afford over time. The other thing is this town is getting incredibly expensive to do any kind of work in. The 30,000 gave me some sticker shock as well as Chief Walker. And it's a little bit of a recognition where there's some limitations on what we can do in-house, both from a technical perspective as well as a legal perspective. There's some things that we're just legally not allowed to do with a certain size project. But some of these smaller projects where, as we're bringing on new staff, having someone that has some expertise in facilities, where we can do some of this in-house, obviously not all of it, probably makes sense, just to keep our costs down. So as we're gonna be looking at hiring, kind of going into the summer, fall, that is probably something that we need to think about from the skill sets from people that are hiring on. So if you really took out that project, ended up being $47,000. I expected this category to go over, but we would have been, out of the 108,000, we'd be right around 60,000, kind of for that category currently if we remove that project. Apparatus certification, again, we've spoken on, that's just a one-time cost that the corporation decided to increase by 50% because they had travel costs. So, and then everything else is relatively in line with budgets. Any questions on logistics?
No.
Pages out of order here. Not myself. So prevention and education. This is an area that was just a little behind. Prevention education is, for the most part, plan check that's done by an external consultant, and some of those costs are just catching up from when Chief Morrow left. Took a little bit for Inspector Compton and Chief McCarthy to get that caught up. So a little bit of a pass through in the sense that a lot of those costs are captured on the front end by filing miscellaneous fees, but it is costing us slightly more on the cost side of getting that plan check than we do charge for fees. I have tasked Chief McCarthy to work on updating our fee schedule, so we're hoping to bring that before you within probably the next 6 months because of some other items that need to get adjusted. Any questions on prevention? Okay, and then moving forward on training, we're below budget. We're kind of hitting the heavy part of our spring training starting up this next month. Chief Walker is going to be doing a driver operator academy. So it's basically an engineering academy. He'll be doing the 1A at the beginning of May. And we've actually opened up the class for across both counties just because we're one of the few groups that can do this internally, and it's difficult to get these truly certified classes. So we offered it to essentially everybody in Mono County, and we're expecting to have 20 people in the class. Scott, do you have a rough idea of like what proportion of that is external and what portion is internal?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, we got the expert right there.
We have 5 expert people running our class 3 in June and 2 mail.
Okay.
The rest are ours.
Yep, so we're gonna have 15 of ours, Antelope Valley in June, who are definitely our partners on the wildland side as well. The 15 is probably a high number from where we need, but with our turnover, we expect to lose them. And our thought process was anybody that's gonna be coming in and working on our summer seasonal, doing the wildland program, we're gonna put them through the class because at a minimum, it's nice to have somebody that can jump in and drive an apparatus, especially if you're on this, 14 big equipment. Getting somebody else that can drive the engine to give the engineer a break is instrumental. So it's going to be a little bit of work for Chief Walker to put that class through. It's a big class even with 5 people because you have to get everybody driving multiple apparatus, and it can be pretty labor intensive, but it's a good class to do that. The other classes we'll be doing directly after that are going to be our engine boss and crew boss, which are again wildland classes that are needed kind of for the officer individual to be out leading a crew on incidents. Moving on to utilities, I think we've finally kind of caught up to that inflation. This has been a category that we've just been behind on for the next few years, but I wouldn't get too excited. I think we'll probably glide path where we need to be. Our electricity costs are mostly a reflection of some increase in costs and some increase due to the tinkering and trying to get our backup battery systems just right. So Chief Walker started to get his hands around that. It's been a painful process for him, I think. Any questions on utilities?
We'll let anybody tell you that this battery thing's all figured out.
So, couple things I just note. So from the income side, if you take kind of our expected budget and you add in about the 900,000 that's for annual expenses for wildland, we're gonna come in at about 5.6 million, 5.7. If you take a look at kind of our current glide path on expenditures, you add in, and this is a big one, the board made the decision to kind of be running in the red by putting 14.5% towards capital replacement. And we had traditionally done 225,000 for a longer period there. So the percentage allows you to capture for the fact that that number has to move up over time. And it's also reflective of the fact that, we purchased a piece of apparatus for about 300, what was the last type 3?
So 330, the first one.
330,000, and we hit repeat on the identical piece of equipment, and it was 530. So just getting our capital expenditures where they need to be. So taking a look at current glide path on expenses, we're looking at probably another 700,000 to 800,000 personnel costs to get to the end of the year, mostly because we're also going to be ramping up in May, bringing on our 12 personnel. We're going to end up at about 5.8 million on the expense side. So again, we've closed a lot of that gap, not all of it. I think if we'd had to close it harder, if we had passed the ballot measure, we could have done that, but we kind of took in a path that allowed us to continue services at what we thought was the appropriate path, knowing we'd hopefully end up where we needed to be and would adjust accordingly if we didn't. So that's where we are with budget to date. Any questions on that?
No? All right, thanks, chief. Let's see, moving on to the next agenda item, consent agenda, there's none, oh, sorry, old business, none. Let's see, new business, we'll move on to, put on my glasses. Item B, update to state mandated LRA fire hazard severity map.
All right, so Chief McCarthy was gonna present on this, but he got out of it by going to a burn class. So he's actually down in Paula, I think, down by Temecula, working on some prescribed burning so that he can run towards the strike team leader and put the district forward on that aspect. So if you turn to page 13, I'll take you through these items. And we figure we could probably, since everybody has a slide, so probably we don't have to put it up on the screen or anything. So we gave this identical presentation to Mammoth Lakes Town Council on the 16th. And I'll just take this board through it. If you turn to page 14. So the original maps were actually put out in 2007. This is all mandated by the state legislature. And this is one of those where, sometimes the legislature can go kind of prescriptive in the general direction that they want to go to. And sometimes they're very defined in the sense that they tell you exactly what you have to do. This is one of those that's exactly what you have to do. And in a lot of ways, we are just implementing what the state legislature has decreed. And we don't have very little, if no, flexibility in kind of the steps that we have to follow through this. Sure, there are some areas where we can go more stringent, but we're not recommending that at this time for various reasons. So again, prior to where we are in the process, CAL FIRE is required by state law to determine hazard severity for state and local areas in the state. They started with the state areas and they put those out first, and then they started working through the local areas. This process has been pushed back multiple times. I believe the Palisades fires, as well as the fires down in Pasadena, led to this actually making the next move because it frankly is political.
Yeah.
The local agencies is required to adopt the state law, or is by state law required to adopt the maps. You can go more restrictive, although CAL FIRE does not recommend that. You have to have findings to do that. You cannot go less restrictive than the state recommends. There's also quite a bit of nuance to this where there's a specific models that they have to look at. And the reality is because it's written into the legislature, you can't actually change some of the parameters of those models. So, you know, both good and bad, the sense that there's bark beetle mortality, that you actually can't account for that. These models don't actually look at structure spread, which I think is a significant hazard. And it's a big reason of what we saw down in Palisades. But they're looking at it from a different perspective. We have no say on what that process is essentially. So, based on that fact, it doesn't make sense for me to say we should, you know, make it more restrictive, but frankly, we can't impact the modeling. What it can affect, so basically the 2007 maps that came out only included the very high zones. The new updates now also include high and moderate zones. And the primary areas where it clearly has an impact are building and fire codes on parcels. Although I will note that Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District has held the whole town essentially to a code that basically held it at very high. So in other communities, what you're seeing is as this line changes, now if you're building in what's now new red, you have to build to this new standard. Because we can designate the whole town as WUI interface and said everybody has to build to that, it's not going to have a negative impact on building within our community. It's also required for inspections for real estate disclosures. That will be a larger impact because if you turn to page, well, we'll get to it, but the area used to be fairly small and now covers a large portion of town. So this next slide on page 15 is how are the zones determined? I already kind of alluded to this, but essentially CAL FIRE used kind of what they believe was the best data and science at the time to build that model. Those things are set a little bit in stone. There's a couple things to understand, and that is this is what's called a hazard model and not a risk model. And we'll get into that kind of on the next slide. But a hazard is basically what is the probability of a fire occurring, and then what is the expected fire behavior. The other thing to note is it's looking at periods of 50 to 100 years. And what that means is even if you're doing mitigations, they argue your hazard doesn't decrease. So if we do everything properly in town, if Bike Park helps and we do all the landscape resilience projects, our risk will absolutely go down. But this model will not show a reduction. It'll show that we still have a large hazard here because their argument is, okay, well, if you stop on all these preventative projects, then your hazard will increase back. So a little frustrating because I think the model can get used in unintentional ways based off what it truly is. But again, it's state code, so we don't have much impact on that. The one positive I'd say from it is one of the other needs for this is when you go out for grants, you know, we're working on tens of millions of dollars worth of grants to start to do this preventative work. It really does show the areas that truly should be getting those grant funds. And if you don't have very high fire hazard areas, then you're not going to be eligible for a lot of these grants. So in some ways, there is a benefit to the sense that it's going to make us more eligible for grant opportunities. So.
There's a silver lining.
Yeah, there's slight silver lining. We'll get into it a little bit more.
A question.
Yep.
Chief. So if they're going back 50 to 100 years, but there's a huge change from 27, you know, 18-year difference between, or difference
Yeah.
in the last 18 years between 2007 and 2025.
I would go one step further and say, you know, they're trying to look at natural landscape. And I've got a picture in my office that shows what this place looked like 100 years ago and what it looks like today. And the reality is it doesn't look natural today because we've let all these trees overgrow. So I was like, well, is your model going to show a natural landscape where these trees are gone?
Right.
Like, well, no, it's not going to show that, you know? So they're kind of picking from
And
both
choosing,
sides,
right,
in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I completely understand the frustrations because I voiced them to them as well. To a certain extent, CAL FIRE was like, we're just a messenger just like you. If you have a problem, take it to the state legislature because they are essentially passing through on some of these things. But it is a problem in the model. I completely agree, because what is natural for the forest? You know, I mean, we can't have it both ways. We can't say humans don't have any impact. We'll say, except when they do, you know, so
Right.
it's take it one way or the other. And right now they're kind of taking the worst of both worlds for the hazard. Again, the silver lining is high hazard here, potentially to make us eligible for fund. We shall see. Kind of, when you look at the 2007 model versus today, it's going to be a significant change. And I think you'll understand why when we kind of go into the key differences for the model. So what the model is fundamentally doing is it's looking at ember cast from different areas and how weather and topography are going to carry it into the community. So it's not even so much as what does your community look like? It's said, you know, are there giant groves of trees that are upwind from you that are going to create an ember cast? As you're all familiar, the majority, 95% of structure loss was due to that ember cast. And is that going to feed those embers into your community? That was always the case in the models. What changed since the 2007 model is used to use just 20% mile/hour winds across the state, just on average. If you're in, you know, Temecula, 20-mile-an-hour winds are probably appropriate. What the new model does is it uses the 95th percentile of local wind history over the last 20 to 30 years. So it's saying during that period when you're burning, what do your worst winds look like? Let's go to the 95th percentile and let's run the model with those. As you're all aware, Mammoth is known for its winds, so that explains a large portion of kind of the change there. Real quickly on slide 4 or package page 16, it just kind of gets into that wildfire risk versus hazard. Really what insurance companies should be looking at is what is the risk here? You know, what are the chances of something burning down? Hazard is purely looking at the probability of a fire and how intense is it going to be. Once you get into risk, you're also looking at vulnerability. So what is actually at risk here? You know, what is it, a concrete structure? Is it a building with cedar siding? And how exposed is it to this environment? So that point paints that bigger picture. Most of the work that we're going to be able to do from their perspective is going to be on that exposure and susceptibility side. And we're actually, one of the things we're doing with the wildland program, fortunately, the town is going to be paying for this software, but we're using a software called Fireside that's going to capture how susceptible are buildings in the community to wildfire. And we can start to feed those into models that will then show, you know, hopefully the change that we're trying to get across the community over time. So from an insurance perspective, they're looking at wildfire risk. This model is looking at hazard, if that makes sense. Any questions on that portion? So moving to the models and the town of Mammoth Lake specifically, historically, just really the bluffs and a little bit down into Old Mammoth was considered very high fire hazard. The new model puts us essentially 90% in the very high, and the rest is essentially in the high zone.
Yeah.
From a code and inspection perspective, it's all going to get treated the same, because both of those now fall under what we had historically done anyways. We certainly had some frustrations with the modeling as well, because, you know, another concern is it doesn't show federal land. And it's really hard to understand, okay, so what you're telling me is we are in this position because you're telling me that embers are getting cast by wind from somewhere maybe over here, but you're not going to show me what this looks like because it's federal land and you believe you're not supposed to show me what the model shows on federal land. The model is only supposed to be for state and local land. So, and then there are actually portions in the lake basin that are yellow, which is a lower rating, and that's very counterintuitive because it doesn't line up with kind of our best understanding of fire, to where I would think that if you're purchasing a cabin in the lake basin, you probably have some fire hazard that may be lower than you might have, say, in the trails or, you know, by Canyon Lodge. So, like I said, there's certainly some frustrations working through this. That said, we are kind of a pass through in the system where legislatively this has been moved forward. CAL FIRE has its part in the process, and then we do as well. I'll take you through a couple more things before we go into next steps, but we're certainly not unique in this area. We did do a little bit of research to kind of see, okay, how has the whole state changed? There are some areas that's decreased, but for the most part, there was an increase. If you look at Truckee, for example, so anything that was in the gray was basically did not have a risk level associated with it. Large portions of Truckee have now moved to either the red has moved further out, and then portions that were within the red are now also red. So essentially the same things happened up in Truckee that has happened here. Again, one of the things that's interesting is if you look at this, if you're familiar with the Truckee area, on the bottom left side, that's Donner Lake. So Donner Lake used to be gray. If you look at the new modeling, it now shows Donner Lake as a high hazard.
Yeah.
But look, clearly the lake is not going to catch on fire, And the argument is that if you had a building in Donner Lake, then this is what its hazard would be. So again, I think you have to really take the modeling with a grain of salt, and try to get the best out of it, recognizing we have little ability to impact it. So moving forward on the impacts, again, I've kind of alluded to these already. Building codes and inspections. Because we've already had a stringent WUI code, it's not going to change how you have to build in our area. So that's a nice positive. We will see more requests for real estate disclosures, just because every time you have a real estate sale that's occurring in this area, you have to go through WUI inspection now. Before, because it was just tied to the bluffs, essentially, you didn't see much, but now it's going to be covering essentially the whole town. On the insurance side, again, we've had quite a few correspondences with California Department of Insurance and our Commission for Insurance. The claim is that because this is not a risk model, it's a hazard model, it's not going to impact either costs or potential dropping. But it's certainly concerning. So, Dave, you can speak to it. The belief is that the insurance companies already have models that are more advanced and forward-looking, so this wasn't a surprise to them really, and they're really not impacting them. So if anything, it's certainly eye-opening to residents in town, and will hopefully help us with kind of pushing our mission forward. And then if it also leads to some grant opportunities, those are kind of the silver lining I was referring to.
I mean, CAL FIRE, maybe this might affect CAL FAIR plan a little bit more with their modeling, because they're tied together to some degree, but insurance companies like, I wore the wrong shirt today. State Farm uses its own modeling system. I've talked to Frank about this many times, and there are companies that will look at this as part of their modeling system. State Farm does not. They have their own wind and risk models. They're already in place.
Sure.
They've already been calculated.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that because I mean, even now we recognize some of the fallacies in the model. If I'm going to be putting money towards something, I want the best
Right.
model moving forward. So, and especially because it doesn't catch the susceptibility of the buildings, things like that. It's eye-opening, but I don't think
It is eye-opening. I won't sleep well, but yeah, we don't want a lot of other activity.
So as far as what happens next, so the maps were released in 3/24. We have 30 days to get the map out. So it's going to be posted on our website by the end of this week. We also, when we spoke, we're public noticing. The district doesn't have, we're going to have our basic public noticing, but we're going to go a step beyond that as well. When we went to town council and spoke on this on the 16th, there was a request from town council that we go to the Board of Realtors as well as Planning and Economic Development Commission and make them aware of these situations. So they're already getting briefed on it, but we will.
Somebody already pushed this electronically to me.
Okay. Yep.
From, it might have been White Bark.
Okay, and it might have been White Bark's been mentioning it. Like I said, we pushed it to the town, so the town has been pushing it forward as well. But we are going to do both our due diligence and probably go a step beyond to make sure that we're doing proper noticing on it.
Yeah.
And then we have 120 days to adopt a local ordinance. For us, because we have 2 readings of an ordinance, that means we need 2 meetings to get that done. So it's actually, we'll have to get on it slightly before that time period. There's also different interpretations on who truly has to adopt the ordinance, if it's the town or if it's the fire district. We are kind of under the belief that one, regardless of what the town does, we feel like we have a responsibility to push the ordinance, but ideally,
Absolutely.
they're basically, there's alignment there, so we are pushing out the same messaging. So most likely what we're gonna end up is pushing out ordinance as well as the town doing it. But there's, more to come on that. It's kind of over time. So we're meeting our legal requirements, but also kind of getting the messaging out there to the community. So did that kind of meet did I explain the legal requirements? Kind of,
Rusty Richard, like somebody else.
Yeah. Thank you, chief. Any questions? No? All right, moving on to the next agenda item, consideration to approve resolution 2025-02. A resolution of the Board of Commissioners of the Mammoth Lake Fire Protection District approving April 2025 Article 10 special and overtime pay side letter agreement with the Mammoth Lakes Firefighters Association.
So couple things on working with the association and kind of timing of items. We're long overdue to get a full MOU or agreement done with that group, and it's a bear of an undertaking. But we've also recognized that as we move forward with certain things, it just makes sense to get some kind of things in practice, recognizing that if we don't do it now, it's always harder to do moving forward. One of the key principles to keeping a combination department going, which is what we are, we're a full-time, part-time, slightly volunteer department, is basically treating everyone equitably and having everybody feel like they've got a equal and fair share at the table. Not always the same, but being treated fairly. And a lot of the times when you write these things and as the organization changes, there's unintended consequences. So the good group worked on the last MOU and had good intent. And one of those was we were trying to get engines out before we started the wildland system, and we never really could because it's impossible. We didn't have a large enough staff to get them out because we wouldn't have enough people here. And when people have other jobs and they weren't getting a summer job commitment from the district, it's really hard to leave your job for 14, 21 days to go fight fire and then expect to have a job when you got home. Additionally, for full timers, once they go out on an assignment, a large part of that becomes overtime because they're out there for 21 days. For part timers, it would be a little different because since they weren't working regularly, they weren't getting any shifts, so they wouldn't really jump into the overtime. So the initial contract that was done was giving part-time employees overtime after 53 hours. One thing I'd note is overtime law for firefighters is incredibly complicated, and I'm not going to get into all the nuance right now. The basic system that we fall under is, while a normal employee works about an 8-hour day and then they go into overtime, because you need to cover all these strange hours and shifts. The way that our system works is basically we're on a 28-day cycle. So every 28 days it resets, and you get overtime after 212 hours. Okay. And so what ended up occurring was you would have these engines going out in the summer, and now we had these seasonal people where they weren't full-time year round, they were kind of full-time seasonal. So they would hit the overtime at 53 because that's what they were kind of required by contract. So you might have a brand new firefighter sitting in the back seat getting paid overtime, while the captain in the front seat, who was a full-timer, is getting paid straight time. And it created inequities. So everyone recognized that this is something that needed to get changed. So the new system, basically for the wildland seasonal program, the individuals that are working under that will get paid standard overtime at 212 hours. If occasionally somebody does come in and jump on this rig, which is very rare that they're not a full-time employee or one of the wildland program, they're going to get overtime at 135 instead of at 53. And that kind of took those three kind of classes of employees and essentially pays them all about equivalent on average over time. So in some ways, this is actually a savings for the district, although I would have frankly brought this in MOU discussions anyways, because the intent of reimbursement on the incidents is that the district stays whole. It doesn't make money, it doesn't lose money. And currently, on the employee side, we're losing money. There's really small areas there, and we kind of make up for it by eating into the administrative costs that we capture on those incidents. So I'm not concerned from it that much, but there are things that we have to clean up over time. There was an appreciation for the fact that because we have some members returning, but a whole bunch of new members starting on the wildland program, now is probably the time to change that before we started that program up. So working with the association with Michael, this was kind of the agreement that we both think is kind of in the interest of the district and his interest of kind of equity across all the groups that they represent. Any questions on this? Most of the language in there is actually pre-existing language. We're just completely replacing this article. So the only piece that was getting negotiated was that 53 was getting brought to 212 for the wildland program and 135 for the very rare kind of part-time firefighter who goes on incidents.
How does this match up with other?
Great question. So, we are probably on the unique side, not just on the wildland side, but as fire departments in California as a whole. And the tough thing is there's very few comparable departments in the sense that usually you find departments that are full-time and they have one thing, or they're volunteer. And when they're volunteer, they actually don't have an agreement and they're actually able to use, standard CFAA rates. So they have a standing agreement. So if you're a volunteer, you get paid at average full-time. So really the intent here is to pay everyone at the equivalent of average full-time. And we just had written these weird things into the contract with good intent that now weren't working out. There's still probably the one that's the most kind of out of the norm, I would say, is one of our part-time firefighters who's kind of like volunteer, works 1 week in a month if they decided to go on one of these incidents. I will tell you, last year we went out on 14 fires. Most of those were about 10 to 21 days. And I can only think of one firefighter who went on one of these incidents. So we spent a lot of time dealing with these niche things. And sometimes I almost feel like we get too caught up in that, honestly. But I also get the side of creating equity across the ranks. So I would argue that the biggest issue for this wasn't even the financial side. Like I said, there'll be a slight savings here actually for the district to get us kind of back to our getting reimbursed properly. But it's really the equity issue. It's really hard to be sitting as a captain with 10 years of experience, knowing that there's a seasonal firefighter sitting right behind you who's getting paid time and a half.
Yeah.
So,
That makes perfect sense.
yeah. Yes. I don't know if the association wants to add anything on the Tyson or Michael.
Yeah, I think, from an association standpoint, since we do represent people in different classifications, one of our big tenets that we kind of look at is that equity in the cab, right? That when you're on a call, that everyone feels that they're getting compensated fairly. And I use compensated because, it's not necessarily getting the same pay rate, because as we know, for full-timers, there's a lot of other benefits associated, but that compensation rate is fair between everyone in the cab.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I get the anomaly that we are relative to other, because I mean, I live the same thing, we
Yeah.
all do to some extent, so.
The other thing we
Good work.
found is, and we're getting to details, a lot of in the Tahoe area, what you see is they have enough of a full-time staff to meet the structural mission because they have support. So what they do is they build a wildland program that's completely separate, different agreement from the rest of their staff. They can pay them a little bit less, but they're also just wildland firefighters. They're not all risk. They can't go to the car accident or do any of this. We felt that strategically keeping the group together as one group, better met the whole mission of the district as opposed to just the wildfire. So we probably could have saved a little money there, although frankly, then we would have been reimbursed at that rate. So doesn't make much of a difference
Yeah.
there. For our district, I believe is the best model for today.
I think it's a better overall team
Mhm.
concept anyway. Yeah.
And as far as on the wildland and full-time side, right, 212, because that's FLSA, is what other fire departments are meeting, right? If they're following a 28-day pay period.
Yeah, that is the legal requirement federally, at which point people get paid overtime. That's what the vast majority of our people going on incidents will be paying out.
I was gonna ask how that number came up. Good. Thanks, Michael.
All right, any other questions? Do we have a motion to,
Sorry, before we move forward, I noticed the resolution didn't make it in the packet, so it might be smart if we could set it up on Zoom, so everybody can see it real quick.
Is this,
Page-
isn't this?
Page 22.
That's the side letter, the resolution itself. I just don't think we.
Yes. That is it. Yeah. Can you want, okay. So the side letter is the actual attachment document that is the agreement. The resolution is kind of the piece before it. And I apologize that I didn't attach it. So. Guys, can we switch the screen somehow to show what's shared? Maybe.
Alternatively, we can print it out real quick and just get it right.
You could do that as well. Let me see if.
That's it.
Shane, you mind running downstairs to the printer and grabbing copies? I just did, okay, I can only print it down. So yeah, on the printer. Thanks. Print up some copies. We'll do it the old fashioned way.
you want to move to D? If we move on?
Sure, if that works. I mean, I should have it printed. I bet you'll have it. I'm gonna run downstairs and grab the paper copies.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I can't.
I can zoom in like even further and sort of scroll through it if you want.
I'll be reading. We'll give Shane 30 seconds here.
Yeah.
Whereas,
Yeah.
now therefore,
Therefore,
okay, so we've seen how the sausage is made, now we can eat it. Sir,
here it is.
that's okay,
Thank you, sir.
pass it on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, right, whereas.
Next.
So. That's what it says.
It's just not. Yeah, just put it- just put
Got
this
it, no.
one.
Hey, Michael, can you just confirm that you can see this on your end?
Yeah, it's being shared.
It says he's talking, but we can't hear him.
Talking.
I think you're muted.
No, he's not.
Okay.
So can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I may have been double muted, but yeah, I can see the resolution on my screen.
Okay, great. Thank you for confirming.
We all had a chance to look at it?
I think we can read it out loud to us.
Or do I get to read it out loud?
You don't have to
No,
go,
you
yes.
don't have
Okay, then moving along,
Do we have
we have a motion to approve resolution
I move.
2502.
I second.
All right, it's been moved in second to approve resolution 2025-02.
Commissioner Bulkley, raise your vote.
Yes.
Commissioner Easterby?
Yes.
Commissioner Correll? Yes. And Commissioner Mendel?
Yes.
The motion carries 4-0.
All right, item D under new business, consideration of agreement with the NBS Government Finance Group for the partial tax administration services.
Okay, so this agreement starts on page 24. And there's probably no reason to read through the whole agreement, but we can turn to page 34. And that just really kind of gives you the generals of it.
Wow.
So couple things on this agreement. As you're aware, we passed a $90 parcel tax last November. There's actually kind of a convoluted process for how that gets on the tax roll. And you can make assumptions that it just happens at the county because they're the ones that have the majority of the data, but it actually has to come from the district, not from the county. There's some things you can get from the assessor's office, and that was kind of my original intent. But speaking with the other kind of similar parties in our area, primarily the town and the school district, they work with consultants to help them gather this data. It is actually very convoluted once we started looking into getting this data from the assessor's office. And ours is relatively simple because it's a flat $90. There's no adjustments for square footage or anything of the sort. So it should be a fairly straightforward process. But based off the conversations with them, as well as the fact that a lot of times, this data actually gets mined, and then if you go off things directly from the county, you may miss certain people that haven't been captured. Our kind of partner public organizations recommend using this method. For me, frankly, because one, we're smaller than both those organizations and they choose to outsource this. I had concerns taking it on alone. The school district did used to do it. I spoke with Brooke Vienne, who used to be the financial officer there. She used to do this herself, and I do see that once we get more comfortable with the process, that we may try to take this on in-house, even though we are smaller than the town or the school district. But it seems relatively straightforward. One of the things I want to do is look at the data that we get from this consultant and then compare it to the data that we ourselves get from the county. But due to the magnitude of the impact that this has on the budget and frankly how we're new to this, I would feel that we'd be taking on undue risk if we took a more onerous process than the town is taking and that the school district is taking. I think it's something we consider down the line. The one area that we felt we should take on ourselves is the exemption application review process. So as you're aware, our ballot measure made exemptions for individuals for either financial or senior citizens, essentially. So that process really does make sense to keep in-house as opposed to sending them to consultants somewhere. They're basically gonna have to come into the district and fill out a form. And it would be on the district to then take those parcel numbers and pull them from the list that we get on this consultant. Speaking with the school district, it's not a large list, so it's something that we can do in-house. But for this first time around, I feel that, kind of in protecting district assets, it makes the most sense to work with an external consultant like the town and the school district do. Potentially looking at moving it in-house in future years, depending on kind of what we found as we work through that. So this is a contract with essentially one of the larger groups that does this. It's actually the group that also we found out later gets used by the town itself. What I'm asking of the board today is basically to approve and authorize it with pending review by legal counsel. Jeff did start taking a look at the document and there's some red line changes that we're gonna have to make. That said, we're also against a little bit of time crunch in the sense that we have to get this data to the county by June. We also have to get a mailer out. There's a requirement to mail to any second homeowners, essentially for individuals who this is their primary residence. One time you have to make a mailing to them, letting them know they're gonna have a special tax, which is that one-time mailing that you see on the top there. So due to kind of time constraints, and like I said, lack of long-term expertise in this, I felt that taking a more aggressive stance in the town is just not warranted.
Yeah.
So Chief, you're asking
What's
us
the
for
cost?
approval to allow you to negotiate and execute the agreement with MBS.
Correct. I'd also probably recommend putting some kind of cap on the amount on that document. I don't think we're gonna go above this because this is what they brought to
What's
us
the
as a
dollar?
number, so.
What's,
What is that
what's
number?
the bottom line? The dollar amount?
Well,
Page?
you got a one-time and then it looks like an annual ongoing.
Yeah, correct.
So
So,
the one-time of 3,500, and then I presume 8,000 the first year, and then every year after that.
so 13,000 would cover both the one-time mailer and the annual
Yeah.
parcel tax for this year. If we went back to it next year, I'd recommend that we do a new contract just for the annual mailer, and we could bring that back to the board again. So I'd be looking for a motion that is for up to $13,000 from the board with.
Would that then enter us into an agreement with them?
Correct. So essentially the agreement is the one that it starts on page 24. I will
Yeah.
note that legal took a quick look at it. I got this to him last week and we already have some red line changes. But we felt that working through those red line changes would happen in time to get it done for this meeting. So the ask is that, and we did a similar thing when we purchased the new Wildland Type 3 engine. Is basically the board approved it with legal review of the document. So we'll update the terms to make sure that they're protecting the district. A lot of it is kind of basic protections for the district. For example, if you look in there, late fees, they charge a percentage costs that it's a district that is technically not within the California Constitution, things like that, just need to get cleaned up before we actually sign off the dotted line with them. But the overall intent of the agreement is kind of what we're looking for a motion.
Yeah, I was just looking at number 8 and number 10, insurance requirements and indemnifications, just to be sure that we're not on the hook for anything that they screw up. Just bluntly, sorry.
Yep, and that's what we have
I think it looks okay.
legal counsel for, obviously, and work through that process completely before we sign it.
So I'd move that we authorize you up to $13,000 to negotiate.
I'll second the motion.
All right, it's moved to second to authorize up to 13K cap for. And
Commissioner Volkey, what's your vote?
yes,
Commissioner Easterby?
Yes?
Commissioner Correll?
Yes.
Commissioner Mendez?
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
next agenda, chief officer and staff reports. Looks like Nothing there,
That's,
District Fire Chief reports, update on emergency medical services.
so if you don't mind, I'll take these in reverse order because it'll kind of make more sense.
Make more sense? Have at
So
it.
district programs, a lot of our division chiefs manage multiple programs. We had Chief Morrow was overseeing prevention and medical services. And we had Chief Brooks working on wildland program. We lost him as a retired annuitant. Currently, as we're working through the CalPERS audit. So, and as you can see, Chief Morrow retired. So we're a little short on things. The other thing is our wildland program, just due to the need, the attention it currently has, and the opportunities is a bear. It's taking on quite a bit. Just an example of that, on the last page here, this is a map that we're currently working with the Forest Service on projects. And these are projects in 25, 26, 27. A lot of these are white bark ESCCRP projects. Historically, we haven't really had an opportunity to work on too much federal land, but both probably from a necessity need on their side, as well as them seeing that we have a capacity now. They've been very willing to start working on letting us work on projects around town. And what we're working through right now is, if you look at, basically the green projects are white bark projects that are getting done this year. The yellow projects they'll be working next year. The orange projects they're Cal Deer. It's actually different organizations that's doing thinning projects in our area. But when you look at those large parcels, there's little areas that we had concerns about. So for example, if you look up at the Knolls, you've got that green project on the bottom half. And what you really need is kind of a buffer where some of those projects haven't worked in the past, but there's that red line kind of around the rest of the Knolls. And kind of the way that I see our jobs is White Bark's really out there to do a lot of the landscape resilience, where you're taking trees back to healthy areas. And really the fire district job is to be creating fire breaks and fuel breaks around town to protect us if there was a fire coming out to where it's less about being, the natural habitat that we're trying to recreate, but it's more creating a line of defense for the community. So what we had proposed to them and working with the town is working along the MUPs, the multi-use paths, kind of starting around the trails, if you can see down there. So anything that looks kind of like those narrow swaths that follow roads. The Forest Service is doing the ones in blue. We propose doing the ones in kind of that pink, purple color, working it all the way from the water district down towards around the new Snow Creek, and then around Snow Creek Phase 5, and then back up towards the bluffs. Taking on those red parcels, those would be joint parcels that would potentially work with the Forest Service in kind of key areas to kind of cut off the throats of the lakes basin, and then working back around again, kind of on the north end of town to protect the knolls. So there's a lot of work to get done in the wildland program. It's kind of the thing on this slide. These are years of projects, but the good news is we're starting to make progress on these. We're starting to get a receptive audience in the Forest Service to have us be partners on a lot of this work. And it's a pretty big undertaking. So Chief McCarthy is very interested in taking on a lot of the responsibilities in the wildland program, but I also feel like I can't throw this whole thing at him for multiple reasons, for his sanity. And then there's just things that I've worked on and known over the last few years. And some of these, I essentially never can completely, hand off. That said, the intent is for him to take a large role in running that program. And still have to take on prevention because of Chief Morrow's retirement. So those are two programs that frankly could be run by a division chief by themselves. And historically, they've also run EMS. They ran EMS because I had it under my plate and had too much going on. So I gave it to Chief Morrow. What I'm gonna do at this time is pull emergency medical services or EMS back under it myself. And I feel like having Mike work on wildland things makes a lot more sense because I have more expertise on EMS than he does. So that's kind of where we're going to have some program changes as far as responsibilities within the district. It kind of brings me back to item A, which is emergency medical services. So I did reach out to the county CAO, Sandra, in December. We have a very unique system here in the county on how we provide emergency medical services. It's incredibly rare the way it's getting done, and won't get into too much detail, but in a lot of ways, it benefits the county, but it also benefits the town in the sense that we have just one ambulance here, but we can quickly get June Lake's ambulance here to provide our services, and it moves over on a regular basis, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Medic 7 comes from Bridgeport and bumps to South County. My concern has been that this is basically a county has the rights and responsibilities for the system, and they pay for the system. It's an expensive system to run. It's about $1.3 million per ambulance to run the 4 ambulances. So growing it is not something that any organization has the ability to do by any kind of traditional methods. The tough thing is over the last 20 years, and certainly over the last 5, you're starting to see a little bit of the stresses on the system in the sense that just the call volume has been increasing, and there's no easy fixes in the sense that nobody has 1.3 million to pay for another ambulance. We're in a position to where we are going to be hiring more firefighters, and kind of more of that traditional model is if you have them work as paramedics, it's not a huge incremental cost increase because you're already paying for the bulk of the salary. And from a negotiation perspective, it's about 9-10% is the difference between a firefighter and a firefighter paramedic. So we're in a position here where we could potentially support the system. I started discussions with the CAO on this because we're gonna be hiring, some people here. If we had to jump in and help the county tomorrow, if their system collapsed, we could not do it because we can't hold our current staff and bring on new people to do this. So, started with discussions with the CAO. It eventually got to kind of the county chief as well as ISMO, which is our oversight authority. The discussions are basically on how do we protect the current county system, which they frankly have the rights to run, but they also have the expenses. And are there ways for us to supplement that system and make it stronger? Recognizing we can't put on an ambulance because we can't afford to do it either. And the goal would be as we have new firefighters come in or over through attrition, we have opportunities for them to go to paramedic school, make the system stronger. So just as kind of some examples over the last 3 months, we had, for example, when we had the officer involved shooting, Medic 3, the ambulance for the county, was off on a critical call. We were actually already supporting that call and providing a driver for it. And we had our people come in and staff 3371, our ambulance. There was a similar kind of critical call that we ran where we had a car accident just coming out of town where there was one paramedic on Medic 3 and 3 critical patients. I believe one was a fatality. We also had a critical patient at the exact same time at Canyon Lodge at the parade party there. So the resources are just getting stretched. Again, even if we want to put on ambulance, we frankly can't. But one thing that we could do is increase our ALS capacity. So when our people who are on the engine can then cross staff and jump on our ambulance. And the nice thing is from the county perspective is they still have, we would keep our ambulance as basic life support. It's a way to kind of protect the current agreement that the county has and protect our revenue stream while improving services. So in the past, when Mammoth Fire has looked at trying to support services, there's been concern about taking over. The reality is it would cost us about the same or maybe more to run Medic 3 as it does for the county. And we don't have, it's not necessarily something I would recommend taking on, but this is a way to improve the system potentially without having a negative impact on the county. There's a couple things that make this place work. One has been the relationship between the medics and the fire district. When I started here 25 years ago, it was very strong. It went downhill for a period of time. Today, it's probably as strong as it's been since I first got here. And I think that those are things we have to protect to make sure that the system stays whole. But we also can't sit and do nothing at this point. I do feel like we have some responsibilities to provide services. And frankly, the expectation in Mammoth is slightly different than you might have in the Tri-Valley or other areas where this is the one area that's not subsidized and doesn't receive, additional funding. So had good discussions with the CAO. She basically pointed me towards kind of the department head that runs that, who's Brian Bullock, who also used to be my old partner. We've had some good discussions, and ISOMA thinks it's a great model to look at moving forward. I also talked to the station captain here who oversees the medics at Medic 3, and he's supportive. So I think that, you know, moving this forward would require basically all parties to feel like they're being treated fairly and aren't getting put at risk, and we are improving services. I'd also note that it's not a panacea of solution in the sense that it would incrementally make the place better. It will take time to do that because we're not gonna get rid of our current staff and hire a bunch of firefighter paramedics. I'm not gonna ask Captain Lucero to go to paramedic school unless he wants to. I don't think at this point in his career he's interested, you know, so I think this sets this place up to be in a good spot in 5 to 10 years with some pretty significant improvements over the next 2 to 3 years. And the county has started an ad hoc committee to start looking at this issue. And I think that over the next few months, the board should make some decisions on this. Mostly because we're in a unique position where we don't usually hire full-time firefighters. And if we're gonna be adding some people to the staff, their primary mission for the most part has to be wildland, because that's essentially, you know, kind of what the community needs. But this is a pretty significant need, and if there's an opportunity to move the needle on this and still keep the system whole, I think we need to take a look at it. So.
What about the town? Where does the town fit in?
So because the county is the provider of emergency medical services, they basically hold the cards on the contracts. I'm looking at legal opinions on everything to understand who truly has what rights. There's been some discussion that the town could choose to go a different direction. I frankly don't know if they have the legal ability to do that. So right now, essentially, we all fall under kind of grandfathered agreements, which, without getting too deep into the conversation, there's these groups called LEMSAs, Local Emergency Medical Service Authorities. Ours includes Mono Inyo and San Bernardino, and they have oversight of your medical system. That group is overseen by EMSA at the state level. About 30 years back, there was a attempt to move towards LEMSAs having jurisdiction, and there's areas where it was kind of in conflict with pre-existing agreements. And what happened was agreements that were on the book were basically frozen and protected, while in theory, all the parties were supposed to work through and create new agreements. What happened is nobody created new agreements. So there's these things called 201 rights, which fire districts have, which if we've been providing services prior to 1980, we can continue to provide those. There's also agreements that the county has where they're basically protected under that agreement and they have the right to provide services. Both parties have to be careful because in theory, if you open up those agreements, it could go out to an RFP where theoretically either the county nor the fire district could win, and you might end up with AMR providing services in a private company, and then we could all theoretically have unintended consequences. So I think this is an item that has to be looked at very carefully, has to be looked at from a financial perspective, a culture perspective, as well as a legal perspective before any moves are made. But I also think we can't do nothing. So I believe in a good position. The town in some ways is in the best position because currently those are services that are being provided by the county and they pay for them. So, you know, I would argue that the town in some ways is in a strong position there. But again, it's all perspective, so.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, moving on to board member comments. Any? So I'd like to welcome Jessica. No? Michael? Any association comments?
No, I've nothing else to add.
All right, thanks, Michael. Any announcements?
No announcements.
No announcements. All right, next regular scheduled meeting is for noon, May 27th. If that works for everybody. It's me.
Yeah. May 27th. That week.
That's,
That's so good.
yeah.
Mhm.
And I appreciate everyone responding electronically to the meeting request. It helps the chief and I know we have a forum. We've got. And I guess I did have a couple of announcements. They need at least two of you to stay and sign some checks. And I need just to stay. We're gonna get you as a signer on the bank account.
Okay.
So I need you and one of the current commissioners to sign bank documents.
Sounds great.
Say Jess and two people to sign checks.
Two people to sign checks and just and one of those people to sign.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
All right, well, thank you, Cal. Anything else? Then I guess we can adjourn.
Well,
33.
Yeah, 33, yeah.
Great.